Meeting to order. Welcome to meeting 106 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Accounts.
In hybrid format, pursuant to the standing orders, members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. A reminder that all comments should be addressed to the Chair. Conformément à l'article 108.3
Pursuant to Standing Order 1083, the committee is resuming its study of Report 1, ArriveScam, referred to the committee on Monday, February 12, 2024.
We have a full house. Thank you all for appearing in person. From the Office of the Auditor General, Karen Hogan, Auditor General of Canada, Andrew Hayes, Deputy Auditor General, and Sami Hanoush, Principal. Nice to see you all again. From the Treasury Board, Secretariat, Roche Huppé, nice to see you again. Sir, the Controller General of Canada, Samantha Tattersall, Assistant Controller General, Acquired Services and Assets Sector, Dominique Rochon, Chief Information Officer of Canada, Karen Cahill, Assistant Secretary and Chief Financial Officer, Emilio Franco, Executive Director, Procurement, Material and Communities Directorate. Ms. Hogan and Mr. Huppé, you'll each be given a maximum of 5 minutes for your remarks, after which we'll proceed to rounds of questioning. As is traditional, I'm going to give Ms. Hogan the opening 5-minute statement. Nice to see you again. Over to you, please.
Mr. Chair, thank you for again inviting us to discuss our report on ArriveScam. I would like to acknowledge that this hearing is taking place on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. This audit examined whether the Canada Border Services Agency, the Public Health Agency of Canada, and Public Services and Procurement Canada managed all aspects of the ArriveScam application in a way that delivered value for money. I would like to note that the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat was not examined as part of our audit. The Secretariat is responsible for ensuring that tax dollars are spent wisely and effectively for Canadians. The Treasury Board of Canada has issued policies and directives on program management and contracting to departments and agencies. When it comes to contracting and procurement, Public Services and Procurement Canada has also developed the supply manual. Comme nous l'avons indiqué dans notre rapport, même si le
As we noted in our report, while the Secretariat had put in place some flexibility in the procurement and contracting processes during the pandemic to allow for the desired outcomes to be achieved in a timely manner, it had emphasised that government organisations still needed to exercise due diligence, control spending, and document their decisions to ensure accountability. In our previous appearances before this committee, we have stated that in the case of ArriveScam, we did not find records that clearly showed what was spent, what it was spent on, who did the work, or how and why contracting decisions were made. These records should have existed. Mr. Chairperson, this concludes my opening statement, and we'd be happy to answer any questions from members of the committee. Thank you for your time. Thank you very much once again. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson and members of the committee, for the invitation to appear before you to discuss Report 1 of the Auditor General on ArriveScam. Before I begin, I would like to point out that I am speaking to you from the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people.
Great job of that, Mr. Chair, so I'm going to skip that. Mr. Chair, Canadians expect the Government of Canada to be well managed. They also expect their government to have the rules and controls in place for the sound management of their tax dollars. Audits like the one performed by the Auditor General of Canada on ArriveScam are important instruments to ensure those expectations continue to be met. The findings of the Auditor General are clear and sobering. Requirements and good management practices were not followed. As the Auditor General has noted several times, the rules were there, but compliance was not. Monsieur le Président, le gouvernement du Canada.
Mr. Chairperson, the Government of Canada has put in place rigorous multi-level controls for public procurement. These rules are enshrined in law, notably the Financial Administration Act, as well as in mandatory Treasury Board policies. Together, they set out clear requirements for the administration of government, which deputy ministers must meet, including those relating to financial management and procurement. In addition, departments and agencies have an audit function to identify and address internal weaknesses in existing controls. We promote compliance with these requirements through training and guidance such that employees across the government apparatus are aware of their obligations and act accordingly.
I am deeply concerned by the findings of the Auditor General's report. We have taken note of CBSA's response to the recommendations and will be closely monitoring their action to ensure that identified issues and deficiencies are addressed. Again, as the Auditor General has noted, we do not believe that more rules are the answer. Procurement is already complex enough. Rather, this issue serves as a clear reminder that departments and agencies need to ensure that they are placing the utmost importance on ensuring that procurements are fair, open, transparent, and withstand the closest public scrutiny. Parlant de transparence, il est essentiel que les Canadiens et Canadiennes.
On the issue of transparency, it's crucial that Canadians be able to count on transparent, reliable information when it comes to government procurement activities. Unfortunately, recent reports, including those from the Media and the Procurement Ombudsperson's Office, have highlighted problems with the proactive publication of contracts.
I have asked all institutions to confirm the number and value of all contracts they have issued to GC Strategies, Dalian, Coradix, and joint ventures between Dalian and Coradix. All institutions must verify that the information about these contracts posted on the Open Government portal is complete and accurate. Mr. Chair, information regarding GC Strategies and its previous corporate entity, Corradal Systems, has already been received, and I can confirm that between January 1st, 2011 and February 16, 2024, departments reported that there have been 118 contracts with that supplier totaling $107.7 million. Providing accurate and open information about our contracts is essential to safeguarding the trust that Canadians put in their institutions. We are committed to working with all government organizations to fully meet our transparency obligations. Monsieur le Président, ceci met fin à mon allocution.
Mr. Chairperson, this concludes my speech. My colleagues and I will now be happy to respond to any questions you may have.
And would MLC. Beginning round, Ms. Kusi joining us virtually. You have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you again to all of our witnesses for being here today. It's very much appreciated. Auditor General, we thank you very much again for this incredible report. So, to review, ArriveScam is an application that was supposed to cost $80,000, according to a group of individuals who were able to put this application together over a weekend. The number we were working with for a long time was $54 million, not a small sum. But as a result of this report, the Auditor General's report, we determined that ArriveScam cost a minimum of $59.5 million, $60 million of Canadians' hard-earned taxpayer dollars. And in fact, in her report, as you know, the report stated that this number might in fact even be larger as a result of poor documentation, missing documentation. So Canadians are very well on the hook for ArriveScam for more than $60 million. So I have a simple forward question for the Comptroller of Canada, Monsieur Huppé. A straight question, a yes or no for Canadians, please. Do you believe that Canadians receive value for money with ArriveScam? Yes or no, please.
Thank you. Based on the Auditor General's finding, value for money there was no documentation to support the different spend on this, so it was very difficult to understand exactly the value for money at the end of this. So I have to say that I did not audit these contracts, did not audit the work, but I rely on the work of our Auditor General that's pointed out that it was extremely difficult to, and I don't want to put words in her mouth here, but it was extremely difficult to follow the trace. There was poor financial records. So value for money right now was completely difficult to assess, I would say.
Well, and you're relying upon her words, Monsieur Huppé. She, in fact, did state that she did not believe that Canadians receive value for money. And it sounds from your comments as though you are in alignment with her. Monsieur Rochen, we know the unfortunate fate of your predecessor that still hangs overhead of this committee in this investigation today. I will ask the same question of you on behalf of Canadians. Do you believe that Canadians for $60 million plus received value for money with ArriveScam? Yes or no, please?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. And I'm not going to contradict what Huppé just said. I think the Controller General's answer would be the same that I would give, with the qualification that, of course, it was a complex system that was produced on an emergency basis. We're talking not just the development cost, but the operational costs, the maintenance costs, the upgrade costs. So not exactly an easy thing to determine with regard to value for money, but very troubling what the OAG found with regard to a lack of documentation. And as a result, I would agree with both the AG report and Mr. Huppé in saying that there were some shortcomings with regard to value for money.
No, I very much appreciate that response. And to add to your responses, I will also indicate that the AG did say repeatedly, and as she is in the room today, I'm not afraid to say this, that she also believed that the pandemic, the crisis situation, is not an excuse for Canadians not to receive value for money. And I think that this is a very important lesson going forward. You also mentioned about the testing. It was also determined in the Auditor General's report that many of these tests were not even completed. And of course, when we look back again for the value for money, we think about the testing and the outcomes. This app sent 10,000 Canadians needlessly into quarantine. But as for value for money, it seems as though we have definitely come to the consensus today that there was not value for money. I will press forward then. The Treasury Board mandate is to provide oversight of the government's financial management and spending, as well as oversight on human resources issues and digital transformation issues. So again, Monsieur Huppé, I would like to know, please, was the Treasury Board involved in reviewing the contracts approved for ArriveScam for both the CBSA and the PSPC, please?
No, in this particular case, no, because they were done within the authorities of either CBSA or Public Services and Procurement in this case. So, as you understand, there's a delegation of authority. Departments act within their own authorities. If it would have went above these authorities, then the contract would have had to come to Treasury Board ministers. But in this case, it was delivered within the existing authorities of those two departments.
I appreciate your response, but that response is very difficult to believe in the total sum of the $60 million having been, and potentially, even as the Auditor General said, up to $12 million, uncertain as to where it went. And perhaps I would encourage the President of the Treasury Board to evaluate these principles in an effort to determine where this funding really went. In Section 4.17 of the Directive on Management of Procurement, it states that both business owners and contracting authorities are responsible for protecting taxpayer dollars from fraud, corruption, unethical business practices, and collusive behavior, as well as sharing information on wrongdoing, ensuring individuals do not accrue direct benefits, and requiring contractors and subcontractors to be ethical throughout their supply chains. From the Auditor General report, it's obvious that almost all of these requirements were repeatedly violated.
Ms. Kuzi, you have time for a brief question.
Okay, thank you. Has the Treasury Board followed up with the three departments at all in order to restore the compliance and investigate the systematic nature of this issue? And I will please direct that to Monsieur Franco, the Director of Procurement Material and Communities Directorate. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So I I think that there are various investigations underway with regards to the actions that have been identified, both in the Auditor General's report, the Ombudsman's report, and there's a management action plan that has been put in place by those departments.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, President. Merci, cher témoin.
Turning now to Ms. Bradford. You have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the witnesses for coming in today. I know the Auditor General's Department has been before numerous committees and numerous meetings on this very issue, and it is taking up an inordinate amount of your valuable time. So I do appreciate you coming back again. And to the Treasury Board, we are most anxious to hear from you today. So I will be directing my questions to the Treasury Board because we've had the AG's office here, as I said, multiple times. I'm not sure which of you will have the answers to these questions, so I would just encourage the most appropriate staff member to respond with the answer. So can you describe what procurement measures were brought in during the pandemic? And did these changes have an impact on the issue we are discussing today?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. And correct me if I don't understand your question correctly. But during the pandemic, obviously, and I think a previous member said it, it was clear in the Auditor General's report, the pandemic was not an excuse to do things frivolously, I would say. So during the pandemic, there was an understanding that departments and people would need to react quickly, and most likely in some cases, in order to deliver in this quick fashion, that maybe the control frameworks that would usually be followed would not be followed as usual. The direction that was provided to departments on many instances was that although we recognize that, and I had a chat with the then interim Auditor General about it, in light of that, the importance became the documentation, making sure that if you are going to make a decision, and some controls will be foregone, to document the rationale of your decision and to document any compensating controls that you would have put in place. For example, if normally you would have a front-end controls that your activity would go through, and maybe in light of time and the speed of action that you need to take, maybe you're going to build in a back-end control to make sure that you have the controls in place to at least validate the accuracy of what you're doing. So again, during the pandemic, there was a recognition that we would have to operate in some instances outside of those controls, but thus the importance of documenting the decisions and the controls, the compensating controls that we would have in place.
Right. So clearly one of the problems was that documentation was not done and those records don't exist. And that's why the AG has a lot of difficulty in actually even determining how much this application did cost at the end of the day. It's kind of her best guess because of the poor record keeping. So while the Treasury Board does have measures in place for procurement, it's clear that they weren't followed. And what is being done to ensure compliance in CBSA, for example, and across the government more broadly?
So what I could say is that the Auditor General's report is being taken extremely seriously. We're looking at all options right now. So there are the CBSA issue that we know of right now. We know that they've been audited by different parties at the moment, and they have an action plan to deal with this. We're also looking, as you noted, my worry as the Controller General is that I need to provide myself some assurance that the weaknesses that were noted, for example, in this audit, is something that could be viewed as mainly isolated. So we're looking at different options right now, trying to prepare a plan to see, what we will be doing to ensure compliance to the procurement policies and rules that should be respected.
Now, what role do ministers play in contracting and procurement? Like, did any minister sign off on any of these contracts?
So I haven't been privy to, like I said, I didn't audit the contracts. I don't believe that in these particular cases, okay, I see the Auditor General nodding, so she is agreeing with what I'm going to say. But yeah, I don't think these particular contracts were signed by the minister. So The departments operate within a set of authorities that are delegated to them through, most of them, through the minister, then sub-delegated to the deputy minister and then to assistant deputy ministers onto managers, for example. When you sign something, it comes with an accountability. So these authorities that are delegated within an organization, when someone signs, for example, on Section 34, that is there to certify that work has been done. It's been done in line with the contract, in line with the price of the contract. That's your accountability, and you need to take that very seriously. So these accountabilities are delegated throughout an organization, and like I said, people have to be conscious of their responsibilities in discharging these authorities.
Thank you for that. And what role did the Treasury Board play in the creation of the ArriveScam app?
To my knowledge, direct involvement in the actual creation of the app, that was done under the authorities of the department. Again, our role was to ensure that the rules were there. We have procurement policies. We, at the beginning of the pandemic, the Auditor General mentioned a note to all departments from the Secretary of the Treasury Board. I've also told you that I had discussions with the then interim Auditor General because we knew that the processes may not be followed as usual. So again, our role was to make sure that people understood that should you forego the normal processes or control, that documentation was the key here. And I also own the internal audit function. So I did I've asked deputy ministers to use their internal auditors at the maximum to make sure that the documentation was going to be there and be sound. In case of we knew there was going to be audits on this, so you got to prepare yourself for these audits.
Thank you very much. Maintenant, Madame Sécla-Desgagnés.
Ms. Sécla-Desgagnés, 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you to the witness for being here today. We've already heard some very interesting things, and I'd like to issue a reminder about what's said on the Government of Canada's website. The Treasury Board Secretariat of Canada provides advice and recommendations to the Treasury Board on how the government invests in programs and services, as well as the way that it upholds regulations and management requirements. First question, do you feel that the recommendations and the Council of the Treasury Board was properly followed when it comes to ArriveScam? Response. Well, obviously, if I base my response on the comments of the Auditor General, the answer is no. She wrote in black and white that the policies were not followed. And as I explained earlier, in exceptional circumstances, such as a pandemic, documentation nevertheless has to be provided. Thank you very much. What is the use of recommendations and advice if those recommendations and advice are not followed? Response. Had there been no directives, the Auditor General would have noted it and there would have been a recommendation that there was not the proper regulations. Accountability is important. The basis of that accountability is solid directives and solid policies. Therefore, public servants and others must follow them. Failing that, there needs to be mediation. And in the case of this audit, we've noticed a number of shortcomings and weaknesses, and we are doing our utmost to ensure that this does not occur going forward again. In your opinion, the Treasury Board did its job. It issued its policies. Whether or not those policies were followed, well, you just wash your hands of that? Is that the way it works? Response, well, we did our job, yes. But of course, we're open to feedback. When we see audits of this kind of scope and size, the Auditor General clearly said that this is not one of the most glamorous audits she's seen, and we take that very seriously. So we're looking at this issue. We need to revise our policies and our directives in order to bolster the processes. There were previous audits and we issued additional manuals to do with the use of professional services, for example, in order to direct government officials such that they take the right decisions and consult the right documentation and I'm referring to those to whom the responsibility is delegated. So rules must be followed. Who ensures that the rules must be followed? The buck stops with who in that respect? Well, there's different levels of accountability. We're responsible to ensure that there are solid rules in place. We have an accountability model that is decentralised across the Canadian bureaucracy, and that means, as I said earlier, there are delegated authorities to the departments, and under the Financial Administration Act, there's an important thing to note here, and that is that deputy ministers, and I'll say this in English, I'm sorry, they're the accounting officers, and it's written in black and white in the legislation that deputy ministers have an onus on them to ensure that there are proper control mechanisms in place and to ensure that their programs are delivered in keeping with the policies. So in the case of the Canada Border Service Agency, the buck stops with the president of the CBSA. The onus is on him to ensure that the recommendations and advice of the Treasury Board are followed. Is that correct? Response. Well, there's a whole system. Obviously, the Deputy Minister can't lay eyes on every single contract that goes through the department, but they must ensure that there are controls in place, that there's a government system, and that those controls are checked and double-checked on a regular basis to ensure that things are working as they should. Now, you must be aware that controls are never 100% fail-proof. Sometimes there will be weaknesses and vulnerabilities detected, but the purpose of the controls is to ensure that programs and initiatives that are delivered by departments are in keeping with the rules, regulations, legislation and policies. Thank you very much. We heard earlier, I think it was yesterday, in fact, we're hearing a lot of new things, but the representative from the Financial Association of Canada said that there were individuals, financial officers within the CBSA who were witness to conduct with which they did not disagree, that they raised red flags, that there was no follow-up to those red flags. So even when there are financial officers placed within departments and agencies, their concerns fall on deaf ears. How is it possible that there are controls, advice, directives, recommendations, policies, there are financial officers whose responsibility is to ensure that those processes are upheld, and at the end of the day, they're not? How is that possible? I'm sure that there are some levels of control that are working, but the fact of the matter is that ArriveScam is probably the tip of the iceberg. You know, there are obviously internal controls that have not been put in place, that have not been upheld. How did this actually occur, in your opinion? Response. I listened to Mr. Richard's testimony yesterday, and I know him quite well. I meet often with him, and I have a lot of time for him. Now, I don't know the nature of the complaints per se, but I find what occurred deplorable if one is to rely on what was said. And, you know, I have had experience with financial officers in departments for a period of 8 years. And if an individual raises a red flag and blows the whistle, I can tell you that there are normal steps that are followed, procedures that are followed. And the directors and supervisors of these individuals would have of course, address the issues at hand. But clearly, there is a solid financial basis of control within the federal government. If you look at financial statements that follow the proper procedures and have done so for the past quarter century. So it is unfortunate that in this particular case, there were controls that were not put in place or not followed, unfortunately. Thank you very much. Mr. McPherson.
You have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and nice to be on this committee with everyone today. This is not my normal committee, so I'm eager to be able to participate, and I do want to thank all of the witnesses for being here today with us. Like many of the witness or the members of Parliament who have spoken before me, I'm quite horrified by the report. And on behalf of the constituents that I represent in Edmonton Strathcona, I want to express my thanks to you, Ms. Hogan, for this comprehensive report. It's shocking, but it's important information that you've provided for parliamentarians, so I'm very grateful. when I look at the report, however, I'm alarmed, frankly, that we have a procurement system in this country that is so vulnerable and that it has been taken so advantage of. I can't help but think of some of the organizations in Edmonton, Strathcona that I've worked with in my riding that have had to go through, incredible hoops just to get funding significantly less than $60 million. I think of things like the Canoe Volant, the Flying Canoe Festival, the biggest French festival in Edmonton. I think about the Edmonton Ski Club, the Ritchie Community League. None of them were able to access the funds that was able to be accessed in this case, the $60 million. And what organizations across this country could do with that money is frankly what I'm thinking of when I think about this waste. So I have a question, Ms. Hogan, for you. If you could just talk a little bit about, what do I say to the people in my riding, the organizations in my riding who are trying to get funding from this government, but see this incredibly unfair process? And would you agree that it seems like a system like this is in fact very much stacked against them?
Well, the procurement system in the federal public service is complex. There are so many rules, and I agree, and that's at times the complexity of trying to compete to get a contract makes it difficult for smaller vendors, which is why I am concerned that the reaction to the findings around ArriveScam would be to layer on more controls or make it even slower. And that would discourage competition. And the whole point about having competitive contracts versus non-competitive contracts is to encourage competition, to ensure that the public service gets the best value that they can for taxpayer money. So I'm just concerned that there might be a requirement that the rules get tighter or stricter or another layer on that will limit that competition. And I believe the Deputy Auditor General has said it before, and I've said it before in testimony in front of this committee. The business of government needs to keep moving forward. The rules, however, need to be respected in order to ensure that happens, and that just didn't happen in this case.
Yeah, well, and from my perspective too, I mean, adding more rules when the rules aren't being followed is counterproductive, of course. But also, I look at this issue of fairness. I look at the idea that for smaller organizations, it's almost impossible to meet the obligations of the federal government. I've worked in international development for most of my career. It's almost impossible for small organizations to access funding, for example, through Global Affairs Canada. But the issue, like, is there a way that we could look at ensuring, like, how do we make sure that the people are following the rules and equally make sure that there is that issue of fairness? That's extremely important, that people who are trying to get benefits or services from the government that have repeatedly faced barriers are able to access those services. I think about veterans, I think about people living with disabilities, Indigenous communities who are repeatedly told that no, they're not able to, they need to resubmit forms, they need to go to court, all of these things. And yet we see this government hand out seemingly open-ended contracts that the eventual winners helped to actually write. So, you talk about not wanting to add more barriers, Ms. Hogan. You talk about not wanting to make it harder. But do you see any hope for everyday normal Canadians who are just trying to get services from this government? It seems like every day we're getting closer to a privatized government.
I think I would point to some of the work that my office has previously done, and one on access to programs by vulnerable populations. And we identified the need for the government to really understand the barriers that certain populations face, whether they be remote, whether they be Indigenous. There are so many different barriers that need to be addressed, and that's very different, I think, from procurement. So if I would split the two, I would say that there are different recommendations and different approaches that are needed when it comes to ensuring that Canadians can access benefits that the federal government is providing, and that there needs to be more done there to identify who isn't accessing them and then how to remove those barriers. When it comes to contracting, however, there's a different set of rules, and I do think it still comes down to access. However, you don't want to make it so complicated that smaller vendors may not be able to participate in federal government procurement because everyone can add to the public service and make it better.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Beginning our second round, Ms. Block, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for joining us here today. Of course, we've had the opportunity to hear from the Auditor General on a number of occasions, which I think is quite right to be having you appear before a number of committees, given the seriousness of your last report tabled in the House of Commons. But my questions, I believe I'm going to aim at the Treasury Board Secretariat or the Treasury Board. So given what we have learned over the past 18 months, and certainly more recently through the Procurement Ombudsman's report, the Auditor General's report, and actually testimony from witnesses, there appears to be a lack of oversight across government departments. One of the main reasons for this, as we heard yesterday, is due to the lack of enforcement of the Financial Administration Act across departments. So my question for you, Mr. Hoope, or whoever would like to answer, is your department responsible for ensuring the compliance of other departments with this act, or is it up to departments to police themselves?
So that's a very good question, Mr. Chair. I would say dual accountability. Okay, as I explained, departments operate within a set of authorities that have been delegated to them. So the expectation is that when they do operate within these authorities, that they have the measures in place to ensure compliancy to the different rules and legislation, and they have to abide by the Financial Administration Act. At Treasury Board, when there's a transaction or a project, for example, that's above the departmental delegation, they need to go through, Treasury Board ministers for the authorities to, for example, enter into a contract, for the authorities to launch a project that's not within their set of accountability. So there is some oversight there. And there are general oversight. I own, for example, the internal audit community, and I have a role to play in delivering every year some horizontal audits across government. So we're trying to line up our work between, what Auditor General is doing, what the other bodies are doing to make sure we don't duplicate. So yeah, there are measures being taken to ensure compliancy. But again, non-compliancy will sadly be found in some of these reviews.
Thank you very much. Your website states, and I quote, "The Secretariat ensures tax dollars are spent wisely and effectively for Canadians, and that you oversee and provide guidance to the Treasury Board of Ministers," as you've just noticed, on how government is managed and how it regulates. Since your department is responsible for the oversight of spending taxpayers' dollars and ensuring that they are spent wisely, and given that the issue of ArriveScam has been in the news for the last 18 months, who in your department is being held accountable for the failures of the ArriveScam app?
Right now, what we're trying to, first of all, we take the findings extremely seriously. So as Treasury Board, we are looking, all of us there. There's notions that came out that deal with financial records not being in place, procurement practices. There's also a notion of conflict of interest. There's also a notion of, augmentation from an IT perspective. So it plays on many of the different roles that we oversee at Treasury Board. And right now, as I said, we are taking this very seriously and putting an action plan together to ensure that our role will be played in this particular situation. But I would go above and beyond that. I'm looking personally beyond ArriveScam, right? My worry is that The system of controls need to be there everywhere. And like I said, we have a solid financial community. We have a solid, I would say, procurement community. Sadly, we see stuff like that happening. But we still need to make sure that, so I've instructed, as an example, the chief audit executives of every department about a week and a half ago to make really, really sure that they had a review of their procurement practices in the coming year, as an audit within their department. So there are things that we're doing to make sure that our accountability is discharged.
So really quickly, do you think your department did its job during the pandemic to ensure value for money for Canadians? Honestly,
from what I've seen, and I'll speak for myself, I'd like to think that, yes, again, there was no playbook with the pandemic. It was a first time. I think that genuinely there was a lot of people, wanted to ensure that the right decisions were being made. Again, I'm not going to waste time and explain it again, but we did take the time to make sure that departments understood what it meant to operate, outside the normal control framework of the government. If that was the case, need for documentation, need for audits to be done. So I think we did provide direction. Could you always be better? Perhaps, but we did take our role very seriously during the pandemic.
Thank you very much. Suivant, Ms. Shanahan joining us virtually. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you very much, Chair, and I too want to thank the Auditor General and the team from the Treasury Board for being here today because, and I think by the tenor of the questions that we're hearing, all members in this committee have concerns regarding oversight and why and why not it did not work in this case. And something that came up in the testimony yesterday from Monsieur Richard was that people were reluctant and, in fact, refused to professionals, financially accredited employees of the public service were afraid to do what essentially is their job, and that is to raise red flags where warranted. Monsieur Huppé, if someone has something to say about any financial practice, what are the ways that employee can say it safely within our public service?
So, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'm extremely concerned by the comments of Mr. Richard yesterday, and I'm not disputing them, to be fair. I've operated for over 30 years in the financial community of Government of Canada, and I can assure you that when I had something to say, regardless of my level, junior officer, I said it. So Mr. Richard yesterday said it, I think, very correctly in the sense that you should be talking to your supervisor. And if you feel that your supervisor is not reacting, there are ways that you could go above your supervisor, so the next level up, if there's something that you feel very, very strongly about. And like I said, my experience is that, at least in the organization that I ran, the door was always open. And I think that was made very clear that people could actually speak up. So I'm going to have a chat, I guarantee you that, with Mr. Richards. Because if there is, some people that we have an issue, we need to figure out what we're going to do with it. And we need to make sure that the community understands and the people operating in these communities. And we're talking about the financial, he was talking about financial management community, but I'm extrapolating that to the procurement communities and so on. People that are experts in their field have to have the space to raise their hand if they have something to say.
Well, thank you for that, because as you mentioned earlier, it's not just about ArriveScam. If this is symptomatic of a wider problem, we need to identify it and remedy it. And indeed, on a separate note, and I see we do have someone, Monsieur Franco, who is the Executive Director for Procurement in TBS. When the Procurement Ombuds testified before us, he said that he found it curious, and I certainly want to explore that in the competitive bidding process where the bid was rigged so that GC Strategies could win that bid. There were 8 or 10 other companies that could have lodged a complaint about that bidding process. Can I hear your comments on that?
Thank you for the
question.
question.
They did not lodge a complaint, and you would think they would have had a financial interest in doing so.
Thank you for the question. So first, regarding why the other companies may not have lodged a complaint, I can't speak on their behalf. But what I can say is what a normal process would look like. First of all, that it's not unusual, or it does happen, that a vendor may be involved or engaged to help in the preparation of a statement of work. For example, hiring an expert, you're about to buy something, you want expert advice to help you develop that requirement. What normally happens is that company or that individual that's engaged to do that preparatory work is then explicitly excluded from the resulting procurement. And typically what we would see is that in the resulting procurement, that those individuals or those companies are named, identified as having been involved in the production of that procurement, and are indicated as not being able to participate in the resulting, as it is a clear conflict of interest. In addition, in our procurement framework, we have something called the Code of Conduct for Procurement, which forms part of every government contract and every government procurement. And it requires that when a vendor bids or engages in contract work, they warrant that they are not in a conflict of interest, whether perceived, apparent, or real. And so there are mechanisms in place that are there to ensure that that conflict doesn't exist. And it appears in this case, as reported by the Auditor General, that those measures may not have been followed.
Thank you very much. That is the time. Suivant, c'est Madame Séclet-Degagné pour 2 minutes 30.
Ms. Séclet-Degagné, 2.5 minutes, please. Mr. Huppé, I'd like to come back to you. You just said something highly interesting. You said that you mandated each department from an audit standpoint to review the procurement process and to ensure that controls were followed. Now, just prior to that, you said, and you confirmed it immediately thereafter, that there are some people in charge of financial controls within some departments and audit sections who raised red flags and yet were not listened to because it was the directors that made the decisions at the end of the day. So should we perhaps ask those responsible for audits to review the practices that they engage in? Perhaps that might be a solution, but evidently, if directors are going to make decisions that fly in the face of the recommendations and the directives, isn't the system broken? The controls are just not being followed, evidently. Response. Well, my request of these individuals, and I'm not just talking about the person in charge of CBSA, I think that we've gone over that individual with drawn them over the hot coals, and I think that we should now allow the process to play out. But for the contracts that I was referring to, it's a question of the Deputy Minister's accountability, and there are various instruments and mechanisms within departments to ensure that these directives are upheld. Mr. Huppé, I don't have much time. The CBSA is clearly implicated in this, but both in the Auditor General and the CBSA's report, both departments have the finger pointed at them. Can we just offload all the blame on 2 individuals at the CBSA? That seems a bit short-sighted, in my opinion. No, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that we need to ensure that and the government processes that this doesn't occur going forward. But you just said that. Those processes are in place, but they're not being followed. So what of that? You said that right off the bat. You said that there were recommendations and advice issues that weren't followed, but because it was no longer your responsibility. But at the end of the day, you said the buck stops with you when it comes to ensuring that those responsibilities are met. There's a bit of a contradiction there. No, that's not what I said. I did say that there are processes, both accounting and financial processes and controls that normally work within departments. That said, when we see an anomaly of the size and scope that we've just observed, regardless of the organisation one works in, one has to take steps to ensure that if there are lessons to be learned and they apply to us, that they are put in place. So that's what I would say to a department, that these things cannot occur again in their backyard. Now, obviously, sometimes controls are in place, but they're not followed, and that's why we have internal audit processes to ensure that this kind of thing happens as infrequently as possible, and so that we can identify any weaknesses and shortcomings.
The floor again for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Hogan, I'm going to ask you some questions. I of course, just want to make sure that we have the right information for this committee. And I'd like to give you an opportunity to respond to some of the claims that were made at OGO on February 22nd, and perhaps to provide some clarification for your report. So when Cameron McDonald and Antonio Utano appeared at that committee, they made a number of claims disputing the sourcing of your report that I want to ensure we get correct here. So first of all, Mr. McDonald disputed your statement that there was a glaring disregard for management principles. And he said, I quote, "I have always adhered to the core principles, processes, and procedures, including closely tracking and managing the costs of ArriveScam. In fact, I delivered a detailed costing of $6.3 million to my colleague DGs and my supervisor, Mindone, just prior to my departure," end quote. Ms. Hogan, do you still believe that despite Mr. McDonald's assurances that management principles were not adhered to?
It's my understanding that Mr. Utano was there for the first year, sorry, Mr. McDonald was there for the first year. Mr. Utano was there much longer. Our audit period covered from January of 2019 all the way till January of 2023, which is much longer than his tenure at the Canada Border Services Agency. And we did see that some contracts and some invoices were very well documented, very well supported, but overall, there were too many that had just nothing to support who did what work, what did they work on, what contract was it under. There was no governance structure. Perhaps he had an individual monitoring of costs under his control, but there was overall no governance structure around this project. So I still stand very firmly by our audit findings, which are supported by a lot of evidence, that there was a glaring disregard for some of the most basic principles that we would have normally seen when it comes to contracting, procurement, and project management.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that was my understanding as well. Mr. McDonald went on to say, and I quote, we provided evidence both to this committee, referencing OGO, and to the Auditor General that it was not us who selected GC strategies. It's unfortunate the Auditor General didn't have the time to incorporate that into a report. We did speak with the Auditor General very late in the process, but it's very clear that we did not. He claims that his interview was a box to be ticked after the report was already drafted. Do you believe that Mr. McDonald's statement is correct? And I note in your report on page 11 that you could not determine which agency official made the final decision. Could you comment on that for me, please?
I will start, and I think the Deputy Auditor General would like to jump in on this. I would tell you that everyone that we interview or that we speak to during the course of an audit, every piece of evidence that we are given, we consider it. And that is from day one right up until the last day. So nothing is ever done for appearance's sake. It is done in order to ensure that we have a complete picture so that we can provide accurate, factually based audit reports to Parliament. So I think I see that the chair would like to take over, but maybe we could just give.
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, pardon me, Ms. Chase. Yes.
Thanks. I'll just add that I'll point to the date of our report, which is an important piece for an audit. It's dated February 7th. The magic around that date is that we are considering all the evidence up to that point in time and carefully considering the evidence up to that point in time. I can tell you that we received evidence and we were asking for information from CBSA up until the end of January, which we were receiving in due course. We considered every piece of information that every person that we interviewed provided to us, both in terms of the interviews and documentation. So we would disagree entirely with the characterization that anything was a tick box. This was an important and comprehensive audit.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Next is Mr. Genuis. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I am quite struck by the fact that Mr. David Yao was
an outside contractor while also a government employee. Aside from the fact that, as best we can tell, he was contracted out to do absolutely nothing as part of the whole ArriveScam process, the reason you contract out is apparently because you don't have the expertise inside the public service. That's the whole idea of contracting out. We don't have the expertise internally, so we're going to contract out. So what an absolutely absurd, bizarre spectacle to have the contracting out to a person who is also a government employee. I want to ask a few questions about this. Mr. Hubé, fundamentally, is this allowed?
So I can't talk about this particular case, but fundamentally to your question, sir, so the directive on conflict of interest says it's not disallowed, but it really raises flag to the effect if you're going to have a second employment, if there's going to be any perceived or real conflict of interest, you need to disclose it. So
okay. Sorry, I'm gonna jump in on a few points. Number one, why can't you discuss this specific case? Number two, to say it's allowed but it raises flags. I mean, clearly that's a bit of a problem. It's either allowed or it's not allowed. And in fairness to Mr. Yao, it was on his LinkedIn profile, so it was kind of hiding in plain sight.
So I can't talk about this case because I don't know exactly the work that was delivered. I have no clue about the contract itself.
Well, one thing is clear, though. Aside from the particulars of the work done, he worked for Veterans Affairs Canada. Yeah. That department got contracts from Dalian. Dalian did work, received money through the ArriveScam process. It was on his LinkedIn profile that he was both a government employee and a contractor. So based on that, is that allowed?
So let me be clear. If there was a conflict of interest, no, it's not allowed.
Okay, that's a heck of a caveat, though, sir.
Okay, so we can't prevent someone from having a second job. For example, your dad's got a shop somewhere. You go at night and you help him out. That's not prohibited.
Okay, but me selling ice cream on the corner while also working for the government is not the same as selling to the same department that I work for. So can you just tell us directly? You said if it's a conflict of interest, then it's a problem. I think it's pretty clear that it is a conflict of interest, and therefore it's a problem.
There's an investigation into that. That's why I'm refraining myself from talking about it. D&D is looking into it. If there is a conflict,
part of the problem in this whole process is that we seem unwilling to call a spade a spade. Like this, the department was selling to the company that he worked for while he was also an employee of the department. So you know, how many investigators do you need to figure out that that's a conflict of interest?
Mr. Chair, I think I'm being actually forthcoming here. I'm telling pretty much a spade is a spade in a sense. If there is a conflict of interest, yes, it was a problem. There is an investigation. I'm not privy to those information.
Okay.
I have no clue. There could be an explanation. So I'm going to let that roll out. But I think I'm being forthcoming and saying absolutely there's a problem.
I'm going to bang through a few other quick questions in the time I have left. Last week, my colleague Larry Brock asked for a list of all government employees who are using the Yao double dipping model. Do you have that list available?
We for all government, no.
Okay, for all government employees that are
now for all departments, we don't have that list. No, absolutely. We've got a list inside TBS of our employees that did declare potential conflicts and
okay, how many within TBS are there?
Madame Cahill will.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. So for TBS, we have 52 employees who have dual employment, 165 employees, including 40 executive.
Sorry, I'm not asking about just dual employment like they sell ice cream on the weekends. I'm asking people that are contractors to the government and employees of the government at the same time. How many do you have at TBS on that?
So we have none of those that have like dual employment within the government of Canada as contractors.
Okay. So is there work being done compiling a list across government? Because my colleague asked for that list.
Can I come back to? I said, it doesn't fall in, but we'll check.
I think this committee will agree to order the production of a list of all government employees who are also employed with or own contracting companies that do work for the government of Canada.
Thank you.
very much.
Can I just get the agreement of the committee to?
Yeah. So, well, okay. Pardon me. Of the committee, no. There
whatever
was
the process.
There was, Ms. Chupe. You had suggested you could provide the committee with something. I just want to make sure our analyst.
No, I didn't. Like I said, this doesn't fall under my purview, but definitely, if there's an ask from the committee, I mean, we'll have to figure out. Departments will be on the hook to give the information to someone, so we could give it to the committee, or we'll give it to the. We'll have to figure that out, obviously.
Okay. Well, Ms. Jennings, your time is up.
Point of order.
Yes, Ms. Shen, I was moving on, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, just on that issue, is that not something that we can discuss, that we should discuss as a committee when we're ordering that kind of production of documents?
So this is certainly something the committee can come back to. I just wanted to make sure for our analysts up here that if there was a request for documents and an agreement to provide them, that it was captured. I didn't quite capture. That's why I sought clarification. Ms. Jennings, your
just a point of order in that. I just like to clarify then from you, Chair, or the analysts. I've requested some documents. I don't think it's that complicated. Is the witness going to provide those documents? Is he expected to provide those? We just want all the contractors who are government employees. Those that is fine. The official opposition has other rounds to probe and press specifics for documents. If witnesses are able to provide them, they will state so. If they will attempt to do so, they note so. And then this committee can then take a step further if we feel a response is not adequate or information is not forthcoming. So you were close, Mr. Genuous. I didn't quite hear the deal. Did he undertake to provide the documents?
Pardon me?
Did he undertake to provide the documents? Like, are we getting those documents?
At this point, no. But you're welcome to ask him again. So I'm going to move on now to.
So does the committee agree to order the documents?
No, Mr. Genuous, we're not at this point yet. You're jumping a few steps. This committee does operate well with witnesses, where they provide information when explicitly asked in their field. That was not done specifically in this case. You're welcome to come back to this at your turn. So I'm going to turn now to Ms. Khalid. There's ample time, Mr. Genuous, to come back to this. Ms. Khalid, you have the floor for 5 minutes. I will say, before you begin, the reason why I seek clarification is sometimes members kind of let it slide very quickly. I like to have an explicit response from the witnesses so it is clear all around, so we avoid confusion later. That is it. So members are certainly entitled to ask for information if they find that that response is lacking, either because information is not available or witnesses do not know. That is their purview. I want to seek clarification from both sides that is understood. Ms. Khalid, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. And just at the offset, I'll just like to thank you for clarifying that. I really appreciate that we have a clear process with how we operate within this committee. I know that there are a lot of visiting members from the Conservative benches, but Chair, I really appreciate your consistency in how you do things. So to our witnesses, I believe it was a member from the TBS Secretariat that had said that deputy ministers can't lay eyes on every single contract that go through the department. So in this instance, and I know that a lot of us are very, very concerned about how it was that $50+ million were spent on an app, and then ultimately, since 2011, $100 million were given to this organization. So where is the ultimate accountability on this? Is there somebody to blame? And who is it? And how do we get there? To the TBS.
Yeah, sorry. When we say there's 118 contracts, doesn't mean all the contracts were not done in a fair and transparent fashion, and that the work was not performed. And GC Strategies, we have there, we had an audit on those contracts, and we know what the outcomes were. So I'm not going to conclude without a more, how should I say, a wider review of all of these contracts. There's been no audit at this point on all of those contracts themselves, that every contract has been done in outside of the rules because it was GC strategies. So I don't have that information right now. So again, I come back to the fact that when contracts are issued inside an organization within the authorities of a given organization, they need to follow the rules. And the basis and the foundation of our policies is that these contracts are fair, open, and transparent. There's competitiveness, and there's value for money. That's the basis of the policy. So again, it should be, and there's hundreds of thousands of contracts out there. So I would say that there's quite a bit of contracts that are done within the set of rules that should be applied.
I appreciate that. And, you know, like this is something that we hear from bureaucrats and public service on a regular basis, some members to say, you know, politicians come and go, but the bureaucracy stays, and they stay for a very, very long time. And that's why I think it is so important for us to have accountability and oversight over how the bureaucracy and the public service operate. And that's not to say that we don't respect the work that they do, because they serve the public in a lot of different ways. But I don't want a couple of bad actors to really ruin the reputation of all of the hard work that our public service does. So what do you recommend in terms of like what are next steps for making sure that accountability is there and making sure that taxpayer dollars over what is a span of over a decade are not misused, or whether they're misused or not? How do we have that transparency and make sure that Canadians have the trust within our public systems?
Yeah. So first of all, your point being, you know, you made a point on you know, the bureaucracy, and I have to say that there are I've heard there's a lot of procurement officers today that are not liking what they've seen, because they take very, very high pride in how they do their work, and they do it extremely well, and they do it within the rules. So again, they don't like to see something that will come and ruin a reputation that they've worked so hard to build on. You know, I always say when I got audited in my life, unless there was something huge and collusion or whatever it is, weaknesses will be found. And I always told, you know, when I was in different departments with Board of Management, you know, don't give me too much crap about what is being found. Give me crap if I don't fix it. So the next steps in here is the importance is that we take this very seriously. We make sure, every organization makes sure that they understand their weaknesses, that they take the validation and certification and testing of the controls very seriously. And when we find some weaknesses, that we correct them and that we learn from the lessons of others. Because I always say, if they found something over there, chances are you could find something very similar. So take these findings extremely seriously. So again, the job of the bureaucracy is to make sure that we have action plans that will be delivered, make sure that we monitor the implementation of these plans, and they actually produce the results that they're intended to do. So again, we have departmental audit committees with external members, objective external members in every large department. They will be seized with the action plans here at CBSA, and one of their job is to ensure that these actions get implemented as intended.
Thank you very much.
Was that my entirety?
Yes, it was, and
oh, no.
and some good time over that. Beginning our third round, Mr. Barrett, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Mr. Ruppe, the Treasury Board should know how many government employees are also double dipping with federal government contracts. So how many employees meet that criteria?
Sorry, sir. You mean within Treasury Board, or
I mean that work for the government?
Government-wide? I don't have that information right now. I don't know.
Will you provide that to the committee?
I could see what's in the art of the possible. Like I say, I'd have to talk to my colleague, who's the Chief Human Risk Officer for the Government of Canada. We're digging our own information, obviously, so we would have to see what.
So you'll undertake to provide that information?
I'll undertake to see what's in the art of the possible there and get back to the committee with the possibilities of what we could report.
So instead of getting back to us with the possibilities, can you get back to us with what you find?
I could definitely try to do that, yeah.
So that's a yes?
We will get back to the committee with what
Sir,
we
it's
actually
a very
find.
simple question.
Yeah,
Will you
we will
provide
come
us-
back with what we find.
You'll come back with what you find.
Fine.
Yes,
Okay.
I understood it as a yes, so thank you very much.
Okay,
Yes,
so
Mr.
that's
Barrett.
an undertaking to provide the information that was requested. Okay.
Correct.
We find.
Yes.
If we find we have issues doing it, that's what we found, we will let the committee know.
No, sir. No, sir.
No, that's
No.
all I could.
What you've just said is that you're going to provide us with the information. You're not going to provide us with information about the information you can provide us. So you said before to Mr. Genuis that you were being forthcoming.
Yeah.
The only thing that's been forthcoming is each time we ask the same question multiple times, we get more information each time that we ask it. So you're either being transparent or you're not. You've made an undertaking to the committee that has been well received by the chair that you will provide the information. So that's not a question I'm looking for a response. That is a statement of fact.
I'm trying to be honest here.
Yeah. So, and I'm trying to be honest with you that the assurance that you're giving is that you are not being forthcoming. You came to the committee today. You knew that this was an issue, that we have government employees who are double dipping, getting contracts from from the government. This is absolutely unacceptable. It strains the bounds of public confidence when the government says, "Yep, we hired many orders of magnitude more public servants than we've ever had, but we don't have the capabilities to do the work that we need to do. So we're going to outsource that work, and we're going to outsource it to the tune of millions of dollars to people who already work for the federal government." That's why you're going to provide the information.
We will come back with what we find.
Thank you very much. Ms. Hogan, did it raise any red flags during your investigation that Mr. Yeo of Dalian was a government employee? Is that something that was detected by your office?
So no, because the Department of National Defense was not part of the ArriveScam app. But I guess what I could link to our findings is that as we talked about when it comes to disclosure around invitations and gifts, there are rules here around disclosures when a public servant might enter into an arrangement that has other employment income coming their way. And this is a place where disclosure is essential so that a supervisor can assess if the demand might be incompatible with the public servant's job, whether that it may have an impact on their ability to carry out their duties in an objective and fair manner. So what I can tell you is I know that it happens in the government. The disclosure is maybe not always happening, and when the disclosure happens, you can take the measures that you need. I can tell you that it's happened in my organization in the past where disclosure happened and we were fine with it, but there's been recent incidents where disclosure did not happen and we had to take action. So this is happening. I'm just not sure the Comptroller General will actually be able to come with a big comprehensive list because it starts with awareness of the public service, disclosure to supervisors, and then action and documentation being taken.
Yeah, for sure. Who is responsible for hiring Min Doan as CTO, the Chief Technology Officer for Canada? Who would be responsible for that?
I'll take that question, given that I'm the CIO. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I would assume the person responsible would have been the CIO.
Okay, and would you know? So who was that?
At the time, it would have been Catherine Lello.
Okay, and would you know if there was a recommendation for Mr. Doan to that position?
Unfortunately, no, I wouldn't know that answer.
Is his involvement in ArriveScam, was it known to the Treasury Board Secretariat at the time?
At the time that he was hired? Would he?
Yes.
At the time that he was hired, would the Secretary have known? They would have known that he would have been the Chief Information Officer, I believe, of CBSA. So I would have to say that the answer would be yes.
And that is your time, Mr. Barrett. Turning now to Ms. Bradford, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, back to our Treasury Board officials. These are just some kind of random kind of cleanup questions. Why did it take TBS? Why didn't TBS take over the management of ArriveScam development once the cost has increased so substantially?
Throughout the venture and the project, it always remained within the set delegated authorities of the department. So there was no reason for us to step in. And honestly, the development of such an app lies with the expertise of the departments themselves. So there was no reason at that time for TBS to step in and take ownership. We don't deliver projects for departments. We provide the authorities and provide oversight when the department is not operating within their own authorities. In this case, they were.
Could you comment on the integrity regime, and should there be an expansion of the guidelines?
So the integrity regime is actually a PSPC responsibility. I'm pretty sure that you're hearing from them tomorrow, so a question more suited for them. But the integrity regime, to my knowledge, there's an update to the existing one that, no. I'll pass it over to my colleague here on that one.
I would just say, in the context of a review last year on contracts, that PSPC noted that they are continuing to look at the integrity regime. And as Mr. Huppe said, they'll be here tomorrow to talk.
Okay, so we look forward to that. So now looking at all the outside contractors that were involved with this, how does the security clearance work for contractors? And are contractors able to begin work before having obtained the appropriate clearances?
So I'll take that question. Thank you, Mr. Chair, given that I have responsibility over the Directive on Security Management. I think the answer is no. They wouldn't have been able to begin work. There's a standard on security screening that outlines the security screening requirements for all duties and positions in the federal government, including those of contractors. They would have had to follow those rules. The responsibility, once again, though, resides with the deputy head and the chain of command and the delegated authorities within a particular department, including a chief security officer, to make sure that those guidelines and those rules are followed.
Okay, so outside IT contracting has definitely been put in the spotlight because of the ArriveScam app. What is being done to address the frequent use of outside IT talent? Like, we use them to develop it, but then the AG pointed out there probably was opportunity for departments to take over management once they got it up and running. And that didn't actually happen. We've not really been given a good answer from anyone as to why that was the case. So I'd appreciate hearing your thoughts on this.
Thank you for the question. I'll take that again. From a chief information officer perspective, we have launched a directive on digital talent. It stands to reason that there is a significant talent deficit in technology in both the private and public sector, and the federal public service is obviously included in that. What we've done is we've put in place a directive that hopefully will strengthen the way that we collect data and centralize guidance on digital talent sources. We want to improve interdepartmental coordination on that. We want to augment government-wide tools and services. We've introduced a GC digital talent platform, for example. What this directive on digital talent actually does, for example, is it will require managers seeking contract services to complete a digital services contracting questionnaire. If they want to use these talent augmentation contracts in IT, they have to check in with us and provide justification. So we're trying to imbue some discipline. At the same time, though, we can't ignore the fact that we still are going to need these contracts to use specialized expertise to temporarily augment our workforce to keep delivering on many projects. In this particular case, I think I would agree with the Auditor General. It stands to reason that we needed to rely on some of these contractors to get this application up and running. But as the application was developed and was put into play, it would have been expected, particularly going forward, that we rely on the employees of under the CIO within CBSA and the Public Health Agency to run it.
Thank you very much. That is the time. Suivant, Madame Cycle Desgagnés. Vous avez la parole pour 2 minutes.
Cycle Desgagnés, 2.5 minutes. Mr. Huppe, earlier you stated that deputy ministers are responsible for putting in place and applying the processes which are in place. And Public Services and Procurement in Canada has processes for awarding non-competitive contracts. Yet the Treasury Board and probably the department that awards the most non-competitive contracts for amounts over and above $25,000. Now, even before the pandemic, 60% of the Treasury Board's contracts were awarded in a non-competitive fashion. So there was no guarantee vis-a-vis quality for money and value for money, that is. And a third of contracts over $100,000 were awarded in a non-competitive context. What would you have to say to that regarding adhering to processes, Mr. Hupe? Thank you very much for the question. And I'll perhaps defer to CFO Karen Cahill for a complement to this, to my response. But there is a policy for awarding contracts on a non-competitive basis. Now, that said, competition is always what's ideal. Now, when we do enter into non-competitive contracting, we require documentation as to why it's in our best interest to proceed with a non-competitive contract. Yes, no, I understand the process. I'm sorry to cut you off, Mr. Hupe. I have very little time. You're rehashing what we've already heard thousands of times at this committee. How is it that 60% of contracts are awarded non-competitively? And are you sure of the justifications that are given in those cases? And could you please provide a breakdown of what occurred in 2023, i.e. those 75 contracts of over $100,000 that were awarded in a non-competitive process, and what the justifications were for that? The CFO. Well, thank you very much. This is not a practice that we encourage. And yet it is the majority of contracts that are being awarded non-competitively. Yes, there are some circumstances whereby it's out of our hands. We have no choice but to award non-competitive contracts. Now, in those cases, we make sure we obtain the necessary justifications for all those contracts that are awarded, and it would be my pleasure, were it the desire of the committee, to furnish you with any information regarding those contracts. I think that's a yes. Yes, you'd like that? Yes, thank you very much. Following questioner.
For 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for being here and sharing this testimony with us today. I very much appreciate it. I want to talk a little bit about how the ArriveScam is, while this is the issue we're dealing with, it is clearly part of a bigger and very clearly broken system. I want to make some of those connections that are between the audit conducted of the government's contracts with McKinsey that you carried out last year and the report that's in front of us today. So I think there's some important and repeated conclusions in both reports that demonstrate that both conservative and liberal governments have had some real problems giving contracts to either their corporate insider friends or folks that know how the system works. So Ms. Hogan, your report on McKinsey found that administrative requirements were not consistently followed, and your report on ArriveScam found the practices to manage the contracts were missing, quote, at the most basic level. So could you talk a little bit? Are you confident that the Treasury Board is taking enough of a leadership role over departments to implement procurement frameworks as they promised in response to your report?
So if I may just clarify the member, Mr. Chair, I have not issued a report on McKinsey. The report I believe that you're talking about was one that the Comptroller General's office did by asking all of the internal audit shops. I do have a report on professional services contracts coming, and at that time I'd be happy to draw some analogies between the two for you. So I think your question is probably best directed to the Comptroller General.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So actually, indeed, those reports were done by the internal audits of the departments that had contracts with McKinsey. There were, as you noted, weaknesses that were identified. the departments have action plan, but also at Treasury Board, we also produced a report, submitted it to OGO committee as to internally the modifications and changes that we had done to our policies to strengthen them in relations to the findings. Also produced a guide for managers to help them when they have to make a decision as to when and how they should engage professional services. We were trying to provide them with, more tools for them to make the right decisions here.
So you identified weaknesses in both reports. You have come up with ways to strengthen the system. Do you feel like the system is adequately strengthened? Do you think that what happened with ArriveScam or with some of the contracts that we have with McKinsey, could that happen again?
So we've put measures in place as a result of these reviews. ArriveScam, obviously, the contracting was done in the pandemic in 2020. So hopefully, to respond to your question, hopefully the measures that we've put in place will show some improvements over the coming while, and hopefully that should there be audits in the future, that we would see an improvement on the weaknesses that were detected in these audits. And on the future audits coming from, we will obviously adjust any of our actions in line with, there's also a procurement ombudsman audit on McKinsey contracts that is coming soon, if I'm not mistaken, and I want to speak for him. And the Auditor General's also her audit that she spoke about.
Thank you very much. Turning now to Ms. Kuzi, you have the floor again for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I think that it's very important to note that if the NDP member is very concerned about transparency regarding not only ArriveScam but McKinsey, then she should be reminded that it is her party that blocked access to all of the documentation for this committee, as well as the Government Operations Committee to review, and that she should keep this in mind in the future. Should she truly want transparency and want to obtain all of the documentation for review, that she needs to convince her party to provide her the authority to access this documentation. Mr. Chair, as you know, as Shadow Minister for the Treasury Board, I take very much seriously the responsibility of this role, and I believe that the President of the Treasury Board should take just as much, if not more, responsibility in being in the actual role herself for such a debacle of ArriveScam. And I want to ask the Auditor General directly, Madam Auditor General, have you had a conversation with the President of the Treasury Board, regarding your report on ArriveScam?
No, I have not. Typically, I do brief some of the ministers prior to releasing a report so that they are well equipped to know what the findings will be. In this case, I kept that briefing quite tight and did not actually brief the Treasury Board before ArriveScam. I felt it was important that all parliamentarians receive the report at the same time.
Certainly, as President of the Treasury Board, were I in this role, I certainly would be contacting you directly for a personal briefing as soon as possible, and it's disappointing to hear that this didn't occur. Monsieur Huppé, have you had a conversation with the President of the Treasury Board specifically regarding the results of the Auditor General report on ArriveScam?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Absolutely, I did. Exactly 2 weeks ago. Not last week, the Wednesday before, shortly after the le dépôt du rapport of the Auditor General, I had about a 40-minute discussion with the President as to, the findings and also the action plan that we would be working on to make sure that we deal with this adequately. Now, I'm going to pass it over to Andrew here, who's got something I think he wants to add.
Just a quick clarification. I had a discussion with the Secretary of the Treasury Board where I informed the Secretary that we would not be having a briefing with the President. So that I want to make sure that it's clear that we were the ones that initiated that decision.
Thank you both. I will say, as President of the Treasury Board, I would have demanded one. I'll now pass my time to Mr. Barrett, please, Chair.
You have 2 minutes, Mr. Barrett.
Min Jolin was hired as CTO, Chief Technology Officer, in June of 2023. How much in bonuses would he be paid for this year?
Decisions around bonuses will not have been made So I don't have that information.
Okay. So Mr. Doan perjured himself in front of a parliamentary committee. That's lying for the uninitiated. Is that the type of thing that disqualifies a CTO from a bonus?
I'm not sure how to answer that question in the sense that, I mean, there's a lot of hypotheticals in the way that you posed it.
If someone lies to a standing committee of the Parliament of Canada,
yes, putting it that way, absolutely.
They cannot be bonused.
If it's a hypothetical, I would say yes.
Okay. How many email? And actually, I'm going to back up there. Would you get fired for that?
Quite possibly. It might even be you're not perjuring yourself. I would imagine the RCMP would take an interest in that.
Okay, Ms. Cahill is nodding her head that you'd get.
So when employees get their clearance, their security clearance, there are some criteria, and obtaining a valid security clearance is a condition of employment in the public service.
Okay.
Therefore, should the findings be found, it could really happen.
And is it known how many emails Mr. Doan deleted?
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with emails deleted.
You're not familiar with the tens of thousands of documents that it's been alleged that Mr. Doan deleted?
No.
That is the time, Mr. Barrett.
Yikes.
Turning to Ms. Shanahan, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And in the time that I have allotted, I do want to
It's an excellent question.
Address the situation. I'm sorry, somebody else is, I'm hearing other. Okay. To the Auditor General, in your report regarding ArriveScam, you make mention in 1.6 about the report that you did in 2021, Report 15, regarding the enforcement of quarantine and COVID-19 testing orders, that indeed the government improved the quality of the information that it collected and how quickly it was collected by using the ArriveScam application rather than a paper-based form. Because what we seem to be hearing specifically from the Conservatives is an ideological objection to the idea of collecting information altogether. And yet the value for money here was having a digital form of collecting information versus a paper-based form. Can you please comment?
Point of order,
on this?
Mr. Chair. We're ideologically opposed to not collecting information, which is what they did when they destroyed
of
records.
order. I would ask you to refrain yourself. Ms. Shanahan, I have stopped the clock. You have 4 minutes to go, please.
Thank you. And I would like the Auditor General just to comment on, because we can all agree that rules were not followed in the procurement of the ArriveScam, the contracts to produce the ArriveScam and in the following up thereafter. That is certainly evident for all to see. But the value of the ArriveScam app is greater than the malfeasance that we see before us. I'd like to hear the Auditor General on this.
I think when it comes to talking about value at ArriveScam, I would put it into two buckets: the value that we saw during the pandemic, and then the value that would be enduring should the app continue to be used for automating the immigration and custom declaration form. So back in 2021, we did do 2 audits on border measures, recognizing it was the first time measures like this had been implemented at the border of our country. At the beginning, it was done by paper, and it was taking, in some cases, 28 days to get information to the public health agency, who were required to follow up on whether people were actually quarantining for 14 days. So the digitization of that form and the automation of what was happening at the border allowed Canada Border Service officers to be able to physically distance, which was important at that time, and also to then improve the quality and timeliness of the information so that the public health agency could take action and pass it along to provinces who were also using that information. So those were some of the findings that we had about the value at the beginning. And as I mentioned, now the enduring value would be whether or not the Canada Border Service Agency continues to use it as a measure to automate some of the aspects of crossing into our country.
Indeed, and that certainly will be important to monitor going forward. But those early days when there were no vaccines and no one really knew how to handle this, the only option we had was to be able to quarantine travelers and limit public exposure to COVID. Can we quantify the value of saving lives at that point?
I'm sorry, I'm unable to do that. I didn't do it at the time, and I would not be able to speculate on whether or not individuals quarantining had an impact.
Thank you very much, Auditor General. And just on the question of how do we monitor, how do we conduct oversight, we heard yesterday from Mr. Richard that indeed the cuts to the public service done by the Harper government, in which Pierre Poilievre was a member, hurt their ability to conduct financial oversight. And so I would ask Mr. Roupe of the Treasury Board, given that the Conservatives have voted consistently against salary adjustments for the federal public service, pretending that they are for additional oversight, but again, voting against it. What difficulties does this cause in hiring and retaining the kind of financial talent that we need?
So, first of all, when departments introduce proposals for the reduction, they have to understand the impact and how they are going to implement this, and they have to understand, how they're going to minimize those impacts on the delivery of their programs. Your aspect of recruiting people, that's been a problem in different communities, and I think you've heard, Catherine Lilo, the previous CIO at this committee a year ago, mention how difficult that was. We have the same problems in the financial management world, as an example, in procurement. It's not only the lack of funding; it's lack of availability sometimes of these people. For example, in Canada, we don't produce enough CPAs, to be fair. So I do have a problem in recruiting and retaining. But again, I come back to the fact that the departments have a budget that they have to live within, and they have to make decisions on how they will deliver their programs efficiently within the set budget.
Thank you. That is the time. Now beginning our third and final round. Ms. Bloch, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And my questions will be directed to our Comptroller General. I'm sure that you are aware that 2 public servants have recently been suspended without pay by different departments, allegedly for their role in the ArriveScam. Your department now employs one of the principal players in the ArriveScam saga, as has been mentioned by my colleague, Mr. Mindone. And he is the Chief Technology Officer, a position which we understand wasn't posted. So not really sure how he managed to get into that position if it wasn't posted. Has your department been contacted by the CBSA with any suggestion of wrongdoing by Mr. Doan, or any suggestion that he should be suspended without pay?
Up to this point, the department has not been contacted with the suspicion of any wrongdoing on the part of Mr. Doan, or that notion that he should be suspended for something at this point. The investigation is still ongoing, but at this point, there was no incriminating findings against Mr. Doan.
So in previous testimony, we heard that President O'Gorman contacted the deputy ministers of other departments with some allegations regarding employees within their department. Are you aware if the deputy minister has received any communication from President O'Gorman regarding the allegations of Mr. Doan and the ArriveScam app?
And I'll let Mr. Rochon correct me here. So, to my knowledge, the Secretary, CBSA, did communicate with our department, and like I said, we were advised that up to that moment, it was not me personally, there was no incriminating evidence against any wrongdoing against Mr. Doan. As I said, the investigation is still ongoing, but that, to my knowledge, that was indeed communicated to someone.
Maybe I'll just confirm. I started my position on February 12th, and as I came in, I did have a quick conversation with the outgoing secretary, who confirmed with me that he had not received any incriminating information regarding Mr. Doan. And I do not believe that the new secretary, Catherine Blewett, has had any conversations on the topic as of yet.
Okay, thank you. What sort of reprisals would an executive level member of the Treasury Board receive if they were found to have deleted thousands of emails related to access to information requests and multiple ongoing investigations? And I know you've already answered a hypothetical question, which I think was based on facts around testimony given at the Government Operations and Estimates Committee. What type of reprisals would be in place for someone who has deleted close to 30,000 emails?
I'm not an HR expert or a labor relations expert, but based on my experience of what I've seen, if there is malfeasance that happened and information that was genuinely discarded to hide something, for example, I mean, it could go to dismissal for sure.
Thank you. Notwithstanding the complexity of procurement, as we've heard today, and the pandemic, which we know is not an excuse for the glaring mismanagement that was identified by the Auditor General, I would have to believe that your hopefulness about what will be found or what will be done, and your comment that individuals should not give you too much crap about what is being found, but give you crap if you don't fix it. What are you doing to fix it? And have you determined a time by which it will be fixed? And how are you monitoring the situation?
So I'd just like to clarify, if there's an audit and there's something major that is found, you should take crap for it, honestly. What I meant to say is that audits are instruments that allow us to find weaknesses, and we should respect that, and we should take the measures to deal with it. So the department has a plan. We know of the plan, obviously. It was published. There are some actions that have already been taken. Now we need to monitor to make sure that these actions will actually work. There's also a plan being developed internally at TBS to make sure that we have a good handle as to, is there a larger problem here that we need to deal with? Is there something, like I said, always, although the rules have not been pointed in the audit as a problem, we owe it to ourselves to take a look at. Is there guidance that we need to implement, to do more of? Is there training that we need to do differently to make sure that our people that have these authorities, as I said, when you sign off on something, it comes with an accountability, sadly. So, but our job is to make sure that people have the tools and instruments to be able to discharge in those accountabilities. So we have to make sure to look at our own processes and tools to make sure that we're providing that to the people discharging on their accountability.
Thank you very much. Turn now to Ms. Khalid, joining us virtually. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. So just kind of going back to some of the testimony that we've heard today, it was said that a concern being raised about the procurement process, that small vendors or smaller vendors have a difficult time participating. So a team of 2 people, from all accounts that we've seen with GC Strategies, were able to take $100 million from our government starting in 2011 under the Harper government, and have then moved on to change their name and then continue to take dollars from our government through the procurement process. Either they were the most brilliant company in Canada and the world, or something went wrong here. So I would really appreciate from the TBS if you can help us understand how that process works and how this was allowed to happen with without ministerial oversight.
So thank you for the question. First, I think it's important to speak to the fact that small businesses, we encourage them to do business with the Government of Canada. What's important here is that is the company or the businesses doing business with government operating ethically? Are they operating in conformance with the rules? And are they getting contracts in a fair, open, and transparent way? And when we look at the history, the majority of contracts with this particular company were competitive. And so we need to look at the relationship that exists in the particular circumstances and what resulted in the award of various contracts, which the Auditor General and the Procurement Ombudsman have looked into. Broadly, though, I would say that it's important that the rules that we have in place exist to ensure that the companies that we do business with are good companies, and the majority of them are good companies that are providing valuable services to government and to Canadians. And that as part of that network of suppliers to the Government of Canada, we have small and medium businesses, minority businesses, businesses from disadvantaged and equity-seeking groups that are able to participate in the government procurement process. And managing that balance between, a set of rules that does make it difficult, but also a set of a process that allows and encourages the participation of small and medium businesses. And making sure that if that balance is not right, that we make efforts to correct that.
Thanks very much, Mr. Franco. And I really appreciate that you brought that up and that whole procurement process. So I have some significant concerns about disinformation and how it's impacting our public service and how it's impacting the majority of how we do things within our country, and the fact that the majority of it is a fair, equitable process with a lot of accountability and a lot of transparency that we go through. So maybe you can reflect on how all of the disinformation being pumped out by the Conservatives on our public service is impacting our public service right now in the procurement process.
Honestly, I'm not going to comment on that. To be fair, what I could say is that sadly, when there's a finding of this nature, this type of finding through an audit, it will shake the system, right? And that's normal. So, people, like I said earlier, a lot of people do a fantastic job and they've built a great reputation. But when something like this is found, you need to shake the system up. And you need to make sure that you go above and beyond to make sure that, we could rebuild back trust in our processes and our controls.
I really appreciate you said that, because I think that as we continue, there is a continuing diminishing of lack of trust within our public institutions. And when things like this happen, it really gets to that crux of that trust and just shatters it to the ground. So I hope that we can work together and that TBS and all of our government departments can ensure that we are spending taxpayer dollars in a responsible fashion. But just with respect to how your department operates, and I'm sure you have reflections on many other departments as well, how important is it that we fund departments properly so that they are able to conduct the public service that we require them to? And I know that the Conservatives have always voted against increasing funding for our public service, but I would really like for you to help us understand why that's important.
Well, obviously financial resources are important if you're going to deliver on programs. That's so you need, but like I said before, departments are allocated with a budget and they have to make decisions as to how they're going to utilize these resources to deliver in the most effective way their programs. And they have to distribute that funding in a way that they're going to have, the right controls in place and sound foundation. So again, I come from the world of internal services, and I always vouch that important to also make sure that these activities are well funded because they become your foundation, right? If your processes, if your foundation starts to crack, you will have issues. But again, I come back to the fact that departments are accountable to manage the funding that are provided to them and to make the best decisions possible on how they're going to utilize financial resources. But financial resources, like human resource or anything else, are key to being able to deliver on what you need to deliver on.
Thank you very much. Suivant, c'est Madame Secrétaire Degagné pour 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
Parfait, merci. Thank you very much, Mr. Rochon. I have a very quick question for you, if I may. Now, hypothetically speaking, of course, after an employee has deleted an email, how long does that email remain in the cloud, and for what period can one recover such an email? Response: normally you can recover that kind of email for quite some time. How much time is that exactly? Response: I can't say with precision. It depends on the server, on the cloud itself. Question: well, at CBSA, for example, hypothetically speaking, of course, after you delete an email, for how long? You know the infrastructure at the CBSA. Response: well, that'd be a good question for Shared Services Canada that maintains a cloud. Shared Services can probably give you a more precise answer than I can. Now, I assume, under normal circumstances, that an email would be kept for 6 months. We did ask the question of Shared Services, and they still haven't answered that question. Curiously, they don't know, and yet it's their bailiwick. They don't know. But now, to come back to non-competitive contracts, willing buyer, willing seller, let's take a step back. And those sole source contracts accounted for about 1% of contracts in the early 2000s. And yet, in 2015, it's 18%. It was 18%, went through the roof. And in the last couple of years, it's now a quarter of, or rather a third of contracts. Is this because there's less competition, that there has to be willing buyer, willing seller contracts? You know, there was the pandemic, of course, in 2023, but is it something that you monitor, Mr. Huppert? Response: accountability is the purview of the contracting authority. Of course, these things are monitored based on my experience when I was at a number of departments. When we engaged in proactive disclosure for those contracts, the Deputy Minister did ask those kinds of questions as a rule of thumb, and we tried to define whether or not there was a problem in terms of the use of non-competitive contracts. But that's one of the challenges in terms of oversight that the department engages in. But do you think that it was done? You know, this kind of thing went through the roof over recent years. Is this something that still occurs, this kind of oversight, or is there less and less oversight? Response: I don't have any data in respect of that. Obviously, during the pandemic, those tools, i.e. sole source contracts, were used in a meaningful and substantive manner, but I can't really say. But generally speaking, what we do look for is a competitive process. Question: shouldn't you have that data? There's never been a worse year in terms of non-competitive contracts than 2023, and it's a post-pandemic year. Shouldn't this kind of analysis be done systematically? Well, when you referred to justifications for using sole source contracting, well, isn't it your responsibility? Doesn't the buck stop with you?
The floor for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And again, thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Sean, I'm going to ask you some questions, please. I understand that the committee heard testimony yesterday from Danny Richards, who is, of course, the president of the Association of Canadian Financial Officers. In his testimony, he said that when outside consultants and firms are hired, their employees are still left to do most of the work, as those consultants come to the public service employees for their work to be verified and their final reports to be done. You know, this was something that the union representing the CBSA officers presented on ArriveScam, saying that they frequently were required to act as technical support. And I guess, you know, I hear that, and I'd like you to clarify for the committee. Is it the position of the Government of Canada that we should be overpaying for consultants and contracts and then simultaneously underpaying the unionized workers who then also administer and verify the final products and the reports? And I guess perhaps you could even comment a little bit on whether or not you think it's fair that that the expert members of our public service unions are frequently told that there's no more money to pay their wages, and then they are left with the residual work of companies who have made these millions and millions of dollars in contracts.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I'll revert back to referring to the directive on digital talent that I think we put in place in April 2023. And I will note that we put that in place with the input and ongoing engagement of the Professional Institute of the Public Service of Canada, PIPSI, which is, of course, the union that represents one of the, I think, the largest union, if I'm not mistaken, in Canada, with over 70,000 members. That being said, to answer your question specifically, I think what we're endeavoring to do, we know that we have a dependency. We're trying to get off that dependency. It's difficult because, as I mentioned earlier, there's a significant talent deficit in technology, and that's not just with the federal public service, it's happening everywhere. So we're looking for ways and putting in place tools to facilitate not just recruitment and retention, but development and tools to be able to deconflict and make sure that we don't become dependent, as it seems was the case here, on outside contracting. Outside contracting, I want to be clear, is still going to be needed, but it should be clear as to when it is justified, and the directive now puts in place guidance so that as departments and agencies go out and seek that contract help, they're actually checking in with that justification, and there are other eyes on it to confirm that. And just recently,
and I know I'm out of time, and I hate to interrupt you, but I do want to just say that this clearly, the talent deficiency clearly would stem from the fact that there have been massive cuts to the public sector by both the Liberal and Conservative governments, and fixing it after the fact is actually far more expensive than not having broken this problem.
Thank you, Ms. McPherson. Do you have a brief reply, Mr. Lachon? That was more of a statement, but very good then. Thank you very much. Turn now to Mr. Genuis. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I am very struck by the comments of my Liberal colleague regarding lack of trust in public institutions, as if public institutions can be trust in public institutions can be disconnected from an evaluation of their conduct. I think public institutions have to earn trust. Now, the ArriveScam scandal is an earth-shattering scandal. Massive.
Just 1 second,
Point
Mr.
of order,
Genuis.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Ms. Khalid, your point of order is?
When Conservative colleagues call it an ArriveScam instead of an ArriveCam app,
Ms. Khalid, that is
impacting the public trust. That is the crux of what I was trying to get
Ms.
at.
Khalid, that is not a point of order. That is a term we're hearing both in this committee room, but also throughout Parliament Hill. Mr. Genuis, you have the floor. 4 minutes and 40 seconds, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, trigger warning, my comments will use the word ArriveScam. ArriveScam is impacting public trust because it's an earth-shattering scandal. Massive cost overruns, rigged processes, double-dipping, disappearing records, over 10,000 Canadians incorrectly sent into quarantine, deleted emails, senior public servants accusing each other of perjury, multiple points of conduct that are likely criminal. Yes, this is impacting public trust. The public will only trust institutions when and to the extent that those institutions actually earn their trust. So it's pretty rich for Liberals like Ms. Khalid to talk about the need for public trust in institutions when they have presided over a massive decline in the effectiveness and the trustworthiness of public institutions and done nothing about it.
Mr. Genuis, just now, Ms. Khalid, you are. No, you're not the next speaker, but go ahead. You have a point of order. It's a point of order, not a rebuttal.
I'd appreciate if Mr. Genuis did not try to malign me. I've already been dealing with a lot of hate mail and a lot of threats in my office based on what the Conservatives have done. I would appreciate if you didn't put another target on my back.
Thank you, Ms. Khalid. Mr. Genuis, you have 3 minutes and 50 seconds. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I would encourage Canadians who contact the offices of government members to be respectful, polite, and gracious, and also to criticize in a respectful and principled way the profound failures of this government, and I don't think there is anything wrong with criticizing the actions or conduct of members that merit that criticism in this ArriveScam scandal. A quick question for Mr. Hupé. A lot clearly went wrong with ArriveScam. You said we don't need new rules. Procurement is complex enough. I think it's too complex, actually, and the problem we have is that this government builds highly complex systems that end up masking corruption or direct accountability. But it seems like you set up a false choice, which is either the system stays as it is, or we add additional rules that make it more complex. Isn't the alternative to fix the system so that it's simpler and has clear lines of accountability so that we can actually identify and hold accountable individuals who engage in corrupt action?
So we're always looking to improve on the system. I think that would be a mistake not to do that. In this particular case, my comments were to the effect that, as the Auditor General mentioned, the rules were not followed here. So that's different than, so building, I've got 30 years experience, building a bunch of red tape on top of processes because there's something bad that happened is, in my mind, not the solution here. The problem is that we need to make sure that the compliance of the rules gets respected.
Right.
So that's what the actions will be.
I agree with you that making the system more complex isn't the solution. We need the system to be clear, to work, to hold people accountable for what they've done wrong. But that does mean pretty substantial changes, including changes in leadership. Now, I want to put a fine point on this. Your department, Treasury Board, actually sends the checks for ArriveScam, right?
Send the checks?
Signs the checks, pays
No.
the expenses.
No.
Okay.
No, not at all.
Okay.
No, we,
okay.
the department would approve the actual payment under Section 34, so there's someone that validates.
Okay.
And then the check printing actually happens by the Receiver General,
I'm
which is
getting
PSPC.
process aspects mixed up.
So tomorrow, PSPC.
But you're approving. So do you, to put a fine point on it, do you know how much was spent? I mean, are you able to answer the questions?
Listen, the Auditor General went through the files.
Right.
She did an audit, and she found, that she wasn't able to trace all the financial records. So, no, I don't, obviously, or else I would have given it to her.
Hence the problem. Chair, I want to move a motion now, and I'll explain after I've moved it, that the committee report to the House that it calls on the government to prohibit any government employee from simultaneously working as an external contractor. That is a matter at hand motion. I've sent an embargoed copy to the clerk who can distribute it.
Thank you. Just 1 second, please.
What's an embargoed copy?
Members have received that motion, and I certainly welcome all members to send motions to the clerk before they are tabled, just to move things along. You're not, of course, required to do so, but it does prevent. And again, you do so, the clerk will process it. And in this case, as in others embargoed, I won't know about it, particularly when I'm doing my job up here, but it does help move things along. So we have a motion on the floor. I see Ms. Shanahan, your hand is up.
Sorry, I want to speak to it as well.
Okay, pardon me, Ms. Shanahan. I'm going to go back to Mr. Generous. Ms. Shanahan, I'll come to you in a moment, Ms. Shanahan. Mr. Generous is correct. He did not relinquish the floor. Mr. Generous,
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Ms. Khalid.
I believe Ms. Shanahan's hand was up. The motion is still being distributed to members, and I would appreciate hearing from Ms. Shanahan before we...
As would I, and as I corrected myself, Mr. Generous was clear. He was not relinquishing the floor. He just was signaling to make sure members had the motion so they could review it as he was talking to it. So, Ms. Generous, you have the floor, after which I will happily go to Ms. Shanahan. Over to you, Mr. Generous.
Thank you, Chair. The motion that I have moved deals with the situation that we have recently heard about in the ArriveScam scandal, which is that one of the contractors was given $7.9 million as part of the ArriveScam process, and for what work we still don't have clarity on. But the ArriveScam scandal led to this contractor, Dalian, receiving $7.9 million at the same time as this person was an employee of the Department of Veterans Affairs. The Department of Veterans Affairs, by the way, also gave money to this company. So you have an employee of the government whose own department, as well as other departments, is giving money to his contract. Now, this is absurd. As I said earlier, the reason we see any contracting out is based on the idea that the government doesn't have the internal expertise to perform a particular task. So why would the government, contracting out on the basis that they don't have the internal expertise to do something, contract out to someone who is also a government employee? It makes no sense. It allows individuals to double dip. This shouldn't happen. I had asked our witness today directly, are there rules that clearly prohibit this practice? He answered to the committee that there are not rules that clearly prohibit this practice, that there could be an evaluation around a conflict of interest, but that in his words, it is not disallowed. I think it should be disallowed that you have somebody making money both as a government employee and as an external contractor when they're being externally contracted on the basis of the alleged lack of internal expertise of government. So I would hope that this motion would have the agreement of the committee, and I think it's important in light of the evidence we've heard to send a clear message to the government that this policy, that this type of practice should no longer be allowed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Genuis. Ms. Shanahan, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Chair. And again, we see a colleague, member of this committee, pulling a stunt, whether it's at the top of the meeting or at the end of a meeting, in such a way where we're already meeting 3 times this week. We've met numerous times before, and I'm sure we will continue meeting again. The question was posed to the witness regarding practices in the ethics and conflict of interest that is pertinent to government employees, whether they have a dual employment, whether they are working somewhere else, whether they have contracts. It's not something that I personally think that we're going to settle in a prescriptive motion of this kind. We're public accounts. We study the Auditor General's report. We look at what has been done and what can be improved. And in fact, it is something that may well merit a larger motion to go to a larger study. I would suggest not necessarily and very likely not this committee, but I would ask Mr. Genuis and other members to please take the time to consult the members of this committee before springing on these kind of last-minute motions to us. And with that, Chair, I move to now adjourn.
We have a movement to adjourn. Clerk, please call the vote or call the roll call.
Shall the committee adjourn? Ms. Bradford.
In favor.
Ms. Vandenbeld.
Favor.
Ms. Kailian.
Yes.
Ms. Shanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Okori.
Yes.
Mr. Genuis.
No, absolutely not. We're in the middle of debate on this important motion.
Ms. Block.
No.
Madame Sinclair Desgagnés.
No.
Sorry, my apologies.
Madame
Ms.
Cousy.
Cousy.
Against.
Madame Sinclair Desgagnés.
No.
Ms. McPherson.
No.
5 yeas. 5 nays.
Debate will continue. I'm seeing no No, no speakers. Clerk, please call the vote.
Shall the motion of Mr. Genuous carry? Ms. Bradford?
No.
Ms. Vandenbeld?
No.
Ms. Khalid?
No.
Ms. Shanahan?
No.
Mr. Okori?
No.
Mr. Genuous?
Yes.
Ms. Block?
Yes.
Ms. Kuzi?
In favor.
Madame Saint-Claude de Gagny?
Oui.
Ms. McPherson?
Yes.
5 yeas, 5 nays.
I'll break the tie. I vote to proceed with the motion. Vote in favor.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mrs. Khalid.
I'm just, or maybe clarification, I'm just checking to see how much time we have in the room. I have obviously other obligations in my constituency office. I would love to meet my constituents who've been waiting for me for a while. So just wanting to know how long we're going to spend on this motion.
It's just passed, so the motion is done. Mr. Genuous has about 40 seconds remaining.
Sorry, this meeting, I mean.
Mr. Genuous has 40 seconds remaining, and then we have Ms. Bradford, and then we will be done. Ms. Genuous.
Although I would welcome the extra time, I do believe the rules involve that if I move a motion, I'm done with my slot.
No, I've consulted with the clerk on this. You're welcome to to end.
Mr. Houpe, has your minister asked any questions, asked for any briefings or information? Have you provided any advice regarding this practice of double dipping, of people working as contractors and as employees at the same time?
So the minister asked me, as I said earlier, questions about the findings of the Auditor General. I have yet personally to speak to her about that practice, to be fair.
Okay, she's clearly seen it in the news, I hope, so you haven't heard from the minister or been asked for any further information on this particular issue?
Not specifically, no.
And that is your time, Mr. Genuous. Ms. Bradford, you have the floor for 5 minutes to end this out. Over to you, please. And Ms. Bradford, you're on mute.
I believe, I believe it's, unless Valerie wants the time, I believe we made a deal that I would be taking the time.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely, Ms.
Sorry
Shanahan.
about that.
No trouble, Ms. Shanahan.
not.
You have the floor, and the clock's not yet started. So over to you, please.
Well, thank you very much. I welcome the meetings that we are having on this topic. It's a very important topic. It's all about finding out what happened and how the public service can do better as we go forward. I am not happy about direct prescriptive directions to the public service about what or what should not be done, certainly not prior to a fulsome study on the topic, which is why I and my colleagues voted against the previous motion, which again was sprung on us without prior discussion, without looking for a way, which we have done in the past, looking for a way to frame a motion which does not normally fall into this committee's remit, not normally in our mandate. But we have found ways working with all the parties to put together a motion that would indeed represent the wishes of all members of this committee, because this is a committee that works normally on a consensual basis. And it is very disappointing to see it being instrumentalized, used, and weaponized by certain members for their own, I guess, social media purposes. But on that note, my concern is with producing a list of people without any context. And I would like to hear Mr. Hubé and the Auditor General on what they think of this motion. Thank you.
Honestly, I don't have any comments on the motion. This is outside my pay grade here, so I'm going to leave the system take care of itself from that perspective.
Auditor General.
Again, I'm not going to tell the committee how to carry out its business. What I can tell you is that there are rules that already exist around public servants needing to disclose whether they have other employment income sources. And that disclosure is meant to ensure that there isn't a conflict of interest with the duties of a public servant and other duties that they may have. I would argue that it's a situation where the rules need to be enforced. And so it starts with awareness, making sure all public servants are aware that the rules exist, that the disclosure happens, that the dialogue happens between a supervisor and an individual. And then finally, that once a decision is made, whether other employment is allowed or not, it's well documented so that there are no situations of ambiguity. That it is very clear that a public servant should not do something that would impede their ability to be objective and fair as they carry out their responsibilities.
Well, thank you for that, because I think that is the reassurance that we need, that the rules are in place, that proper procedures be followed, and it is not for the political arm to start telling to start governing, to start micromanaging the departments and the procedures of the public service. I think it has been said here before, we have a public service that is second to none, which is why it's even more important to find out who are acting contrary to that, who are the bad apples, and how we need to address those problems going further. And Chair, you did say that this would be the last slot, but I'm afraid I have to move on as well, and so I move that we do now adjourn.
Well, you are done, so do you want me to take a vote, or do you want me to excuse the witnesses? You have moved it, so you've moved it, so go ahead, Clerk.
Yeah, let's do it.
Shall the committee adjourn? Ms. Bradford.
Yes.
Ms. Vandenbeld.
Yes.
Ms. Khalid. Ms. Khalid.
Apologies, I'm deciding whether I want to continue on this very important topic. Yes.
Ms. Shanahan.
Yes.
Mr. El-Khoury.
Yes.
Mr. Genuis.
No.
Ms. Block.
No.
Ms. Kuzi.
Against.
Madame Saint-Claude de Gagné.
Oui.
Ms. McPherson.
Yes.
7 yeas, 3 nays.
Can I thank the witnesses, or just adjourn?
Your turn is supposed to adjourn.
I am instructed to adjourn. Thank you for coming.
See you tomorrow, Sheriff.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Well, there we have it. That was actually kind of funny. Liberals got shut down with their shutdown. Anyway, anyone that's new to the channel, please like and subscribe, and we will be back, I think, tomorrow. I will have to check, but I will post it in the community tab, so keep an eye out for the agenda that gets released. Other than that, have a wonderful day. Don't forget to like, subscribe, become a member, and we'll see you later.